Hello there, my name is Mooseman, and today on a very special video I will be informing you of whether you should play, wait or avoid the VR headset, the HTC Vive. As always, we will be looking at gameplay, aesthetics, future potential, and value before making our final verdict on the consumer version of the HTC Vive. The HTC Vive is a consumer-grade virtual reality headset created by Valve and produced by HTC. For those of you who are new to virtual reality, VR headsets are a display device that uses two lenses, one for each eye, and motion tracking to emulate the look and feel of in-game size and distance to a far more realistic degree than any standard display is capable of. While the look of things in VR can be best described as quote-unquote 3D, the difference between a traditional 3D display and a VR headset is that instead of the visuals popping out of a flat screen with a size relative to the screen size, you as the player are immersed into the visuals, allowing you to perceive the size and shape relative to your own size and shape. This means that something designed to be 1 foot tall virtually will actually measure out to be 1 foot tall if you were to trace the height with your controllers. Unlike the other two VR headsets available, the Oculus Rift and the Gear VR, the HTC Vive allows you to move around freely inside VR using room scale and motion controllers. Unlike the Oculus Rift, which is tracked with a single desktop sensor, room scale is accomplished through the mounting of two lighthouse transmitters high upon your walls or on tripods, which simply put work similarly to extremely advanced Wiimote sensor bars. These sensors send out invisible light that both your controller and headset use to track your position. This results in the ability to physically interact with objects in the game instead of using a standard controller, and is the basis of all games that are designed around the Vive. The level of accuracy with this technique is honestly astonishing. The motion controls and your movement are tracked almost perfectly in 95% of all situations, and that honestly isn't an overstatement. While obvious things like throwing knives and using guns are impressive due to the accuracy at which you can do them, what really makes the motion control of the Vive an outstanding experience is the ability of the headset and controllers to track even the smallest movements perfectly. As an example of this, I was playing the game Fantastic Contraption where I came upon a save room which had various little objects scattered about, including dice and a puzzle made of shards. Instead of playing the actual game like any sane person, I sat on the ground and simply messed around with the objects, and I was able to perfectly stack the dice into a tower and put together the puzzle, which was only accomplishable by very fine, precise movements. As someone who was burned out by mediocre attempts at motion controls over the past 10 years, I was very happy to experience the Vive proving that it was possible to make motion controls that felt natural and unrestrictive. I want to emphasize further that room scale isn't simply a gimmick. Rather, it is the primary reason to choose an HTC Vive over any other VR headset if you are looking for a truly immersive VR experience. The game Budget Cuts, which is actually only a demo at this point, is a prime example of the level of depth and immersion that room scale can add to a game. The game has you working your way around an office building throwing knives at security guard robots. From a non-room scale perspective, this sounds pretty average and maybe even a bit boring, but the room scale capability is what brings this game to life, as you're able to get against walls, lean around corners, and crawl under things, which really brings you as the player into the game in a way that I've never experienced before. Even if motion controllers are added to other available VR headsets, the experience is going to be nowhere near as immersive because these devices are designed to only work in a very limited space, whereas the Vive room scale can be set up in as big as a 5 meter by 5 meter area. This, in my opinion, is one of the key reasons that motion controls have more or less failed to provide a truly fluid and realistic experience in the past, because no matter which device, be it the Kinect, the Wii, or the PS Move, you are always restricted in some way in how you can move. With the Vive, that is no longer the case. Anything you want to do can be done as long as you have the space for room scale. While room scale sounds amazing on paper, one question you may have is how does it work within a limited space? Whenever you get close to a real wall, the Vive will actually show you a virtual border to indicate that you are near the edge of your play zone. To extend the range of movement in most games, you have the ability to teleport, moving you and your room space to a different part of the level. This effectively separates your movement into two parts, covering large movements with teleportation and using body tracking for everything else. As someone who didn't actually get to try a Vive until I got my own, I was initially kind of puzzled as to why you simply wouldn't map secondary movement controls to the trackpad, allowing for movement similar to a Wiimote nunchuck instead of the constant jumpy teleportation. But the reasoning behind this design choice, which is used by pretty much all Vive developers is that having independent motion on top of room scale causes an extreme degree of motion sickness due to how your brain perceives that kind of movement in VR. While most people won't get motion sick playing the Vive regularly, adding traditional movement on top of room scale creates the sensation of the floor moving below you instead of you moving across the floor, breaking your immersion and causing nausea. The only game that I've actually seen that does this kind of movement effectively is Hover Junkers, because you're using it to move a ship rather than move your individual player, which your brain accepts as realistic. But even then, Hover Junkers is the only game I've played so far that has even made me feel slightly nauseous. So how much room do you need to effectively play room scale games? It depends mostly on the game, but at minimum you will need a 2.5 meter by 1.5 meter play area, and while I found this area to be a bit small for most games, it does work. Obviously, the bigger the space, the better room scale is, with the maximum size being a 5 by 5 meter area. While I talked a bit earlier on how impressive the Lighthouse tracking technology is, the controller is the second half of the equation in making the tracking feel smooth and accurate. Each controller sensor disc contains 21 individual photodiodes, resulting in the ability to track the controller in 360 degrees even if the controller is partially blocked by the player's body. In addition to the motion tracking, the controller has two menu buttons, a trigger, two squeeze grip buttons, and a circular trackpad. The circular trackpad is extremely accurate and, depending on the developer's preferences, can be mapped to serve as buttons as well. Haptic feedback is an often missed but still very important part to the quality of the controllers. Similar to the Valve controller, the Vive controllers have high definition haptic feedback that not only provides traditional rumble, but more importantly provides extremely nuanced vibrations to simulate actually holding and interacting with objects. While the importance of haptic feedback is even harder to describe than VR in many ways, try opening a desk or kitchen drawer and pay attention to not only the weight of the drawer, but the feeling it has as it slides out. This feeling is what haptic feedback conveys, and it adds a surprising amount of immersion for a seemingly insignificant feature. One of the most important aspects of playing active motion-based games is how durable your controllers are, because if you're like me and have limited space to work with, you will inevitably hit something. Luckily, the Vive controllers can handle quite a beating, but they are not indestructible, and I actually experienced this firsthand. During a VR party I had, someone got a little bit too excited and full force punched a wall with my Vive controller, snapping off the top and disabling all the motion capability. However, the controller is actually designed to take these kind of hits to a degree, and as a result there was no structural damage to the plastic, and the only internal damage that needed to be repaired were two bands that snap out of their connectors in the case of a dislodged top section. Any other controller that had gone through this level of force would have been in pieces, and while I wouldn't recommend it, they can take some serious punishment. For the aesthetic portion of this review, we'll be looking at the performance and overall image quality of the headset portion of the Vive. The biggest issue I have with the headset is the quality of the visuals, with the main issue being the screen door effect. The screen door effect is a slight lattice on top of everything you see, which reduces the overall visual quality fairly significantly and is a result of having a lens inches away from your eye. When you watch YouTube videos or streams of VR games, you as the audience are actually getting a much clearer picture than the person in the VR headset is getting. To us in the headset, the picture actually looks a little something like this. While this quality may look unappealing when looking at the gameplay from a traditional monitor, the reduced clarity is much less noticeable when playing an actual game. Since you are moving around constantly and taking in a large range of visuals, your brain will naturally filter out the screen door effect. Even so, it definitely reduces the visual quality significantly, and is probably the biggest reason to consider waiting for the next generation of VR headsets over the Vive. Where this reduced clarity escalates from slightly annoying to an actual problem is when you are trying to focus on minute details such as text or are watching traditional media in VR. One of the key things I was actually interested in doing in VR was watching movies, because you're actually able to create theater-sized screens to watch your media on. However, the screen door effect becomes extremely apparent when watching movies or browsing the internet, and while it still is enjoyable to do, if you're looking for a device to primarily replace your monitor or TV, you'll probably be disappointed unless you are okay with giving up high quality for a bigger screen. One of the nice additional features to the Vive headset headset is the addition of the front camera. While this camera isn't used for any gameplay related purposes yet, you could easily double tap the menu to bring up a visual of your room or set it to appear whenever you get close to your border, allowing you to easily see what is going on outside of VR without taking off your headset. While having the camera as your chaperone borders is nice, for some reason it seems to cause some performance and tracking issues when it is turned on. So much so in my case, I've actually had to turn it off entirely. And this is a bit disappointing since it is a great way to help newer players ease into VR without feeling overwhelmed or lost. The camera can also be used to record your gameplay from a first-person perspective like I've been doing in this video, which doesn't appear to cause the same tracking issues as the chaperone mode causes. Performance with the Vive is so vitally important that I cannot understate the following. Do not consider getting a Vive with any computer that does not meet the recommended specs. If you're watching this review, you may have also read or watched other reviews by people with lesser hardware saying that it works fine. The problem is that unlike traditional games where some FPS lag is a minor annoyance, any dropped frames in VR creates a nauseating stuttering effect that will not only make your game experience less enjoyable, it can make it completely unplayable. In order to maintain the illusion of being inside the game, the Vive runs all games at 90 frames per second, and if at any time the frame rate drops, it becomes extremely noticeable. You could just avoid high fidelity games, however, you are already limited to a very small library of games, and if you're trying to get the Vive working with suboptimal hardware, you're going to limit that library even further because any game that does end up dropping frames is basically unplayable without forcing yourself to play it. Let's talk about the weight of the Vive. The Vive weighs 555 grams or 1.2 pounds, which is incredibly light considering it's pretty much a monitor hanging from your face. However, it is still slightly heavier than the 470 gram or 1 pound Oculus Rift. The weight is noticeable and is probably the biggest barrier to playing for long periods of time, as over time you will begin to feel the extra weight. That being said, once I learned to fit the Vive on my head properly, I could play for hours straight with only some minor fatigue, and at no time did I feel like the headset was going to fall off even when looking down and spinning quickly around during high motion games. The other issue with comfort is the wire. The headset is wired with a triple cable that contains USB power and HDMI. While you will eventually learn how to avoid stepping at it and keeping it behind you, I still have times where I get in a particularly heated game and end up pulling the wire out of the converter box, completely shutting off the headset. The wire also does get wrapped around itself and will require some untwisting every few hours or so. The last minor note about headset comfort is the face foam. The Vive comes with two face foam pieces, one for average faces and one for narrow faces, which can be changed at any time. While the foam is comfortable at first, if you're someone who sweats a lot, the foam will become somewhat unpleasant to wear or pass between players rather quickly as it tends to act as a sponge. There are actually some third-party cover options available in leather and cloth that can resolve the problem, but it really comes down to your personal physiology and preference as to whether or not that's a necessary buy. VR is the future of gaming. I have no doubt of that in my mind anymore after playing the Vive. However, I don't see VR replacing all traditional gaming. Room scale provides an amazing experience, but no matter how impressive VR gets, there are still going to be some games that just work a lot better with a mouse and keyboard or controller. Specifically, competitive first-person shooters come to mind, and that's because you simply can't have people teleporting around and expect it to be realistic. While first-person shooters do work really well from a gun standpoint, like we've seen in games like Brookhaven Experiment and Hover Junkers, I couldn't imagine a way to play games like Overwatch or Doom effectively using room scale and motion. That being said, VR is the true next generation of gaming in the same way that 2D preceded 3D, and while there will still be some genres of games that just don't work in VR, there is a huge opportunity to create new genres of video games that simply weren't possible without VR. What really made me realize this fact was the Zortex minigame inside Valve's The Lab game. The game is a simple bullet hell, but it plays extremely differently from any traditional bullet hell by using the VR space. What's exciting about the future potential of the Vive and VR in general is that we just don't know what really works in VR, and the next few years are going to be spent figuring that out. The HTC Vive is priced at $800 plus shipping and tax, which is extremely expensive for pretty much any gamer. The biggest issue with the value is the fact that the library of games is incredibly small and will most likely remain that way for quite a while. Back when the Vive was announced, my biggest concern was that to fully utilize the Vive, games would have to be designed specifically for the headset, and as a result couldn't really be ported to other VR headsets or traditional platforms. While there are a growing number of people who now own a Vive, the audience is always going to remain small due to the expense of both the headset itself and the computer needed to run the headset. This means a less of a potential consumer base for developers, resulting in the chance of creating a profitable Vive game being much lower. Currently, outside of the lab, which is a demo set made by Valve, there are only indie games available, and any bigger developer that wants to make a Vive game is going to have to either increase the price of the game, potentially even past the set in stone $60 mark, or make the game knowing the chances of recouping the costs are sketchy at best. Quite honestly, investing in a Vive is a gamble, and while I can guarantee you will have fun with it, I cannot guarantee you'll get your money's worth, knowing that there will probably be very little support for the headset by developers outside of the indie scene. The HTC Vive is an enthusiast level piece of hardware, but it is going to be the precursor to the future of gaming. Mark my words, E3 this year will be all about VR. If you are a gamer, you will own a VR headset in the next 2 to 5 years, as it is a leap in technology, immersion, and gameplay that rivals the jump from 2 to 3D. If you are someone who is looking to make that leap a little bit earlier, can handle the cons and risks that come with being a very early adopter, have a computer capable of running the headset smoothly, and have room to utilize room scale, then I would recommend that you buy an HTC Vive. The Vive is the definitive best VR experience available, and while VR still has a long way to go, I in no way regret making the jump a little bit earlier. Thank you for watching this episode of Play, Wait, or Avoid. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more news, reviews, and other gaming commentary. If you would like to see more VR content, in addition to videos on this channel, I will be doing a 24-hour VR stream this Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, showcasing all of the games shown in this video and more. And of course, if you have any other questions about the Vive or VR in general, please feel free to leave a comment down below or come and ask me live on the stream.